why don't I just start with the $1 million question, which is we've heard about these mass deportations. It's still unclear how that's going to unfold. But in terms of the people who are most at risk of being apprehended by ICE, say today, tomorrow, in the coming weeks, who do you think you'd be most concerned about?
Given the passage of the Lakin Act, I would say anybody who has had any kind of criminal issue in the past, whether it was a arrest or just a criminal charge that was later on dismissed or an actual conviction, I would say that those are the individuals that are most at risk. I would also put in that group individuals who have prior orders of removal. So if you didn't show up to immigration court or you never left after receiving a prior order of removal, I think those individuals would also be at risk. And last, I would say individuals who are recent entrants into the United States, so people who recently arrived. I would put in that category anybody in the past 2 years, because if I have to think about the expansion of expedited removal, I believe the expansion is going to be changing from 14 days of arrival to 2 years.
Um, let's take, for example, someone who is taken into custody, say today, who may also have a detainer against them for, I don't know, suspended license, as in taken into custody by law enforcement, not ICE, local law enforcement. Would they be at risk? People who are attending court hearings?
Absolutely. They would be a risk. And I think we have seen in Massachusetts courthouse arrests before in the past, over the last, I'd say, 15 years at least. And I absolutely believe that if somebody was arrested by local police for one of these offenses, and I venture to say even other types of cases, that they are at risk of arrest.
Got it. Um, a little bit about those new arrivals over the last 2 years. So my understanding is that most of those new arrivals came through one or two refugee or asylum seeking programs. Is that correct?
Some of them. I think that there are a lot of individuals who came to the United States not necessarily through a refugee program or through a resettlement program, but who, for example, presented themselves at the southern border and they were put in removal proceedings, either to apply for asylum or for a different type of relief. And so there is a group of people who did not arrive through a program that had been created by the Biden administration, but who had presented themselves like before the Biden administration because they were seeking something else.
Got it. And then they, again, I don't want to, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. It's so complex. They are defensively claiming asylum. Is that correct?
Some of them are claiming asylum. Some of them are claiming visas for being the victims of trafficking. Some of them are claiming visas for being the victims of crimes. Some of them are claiming visas for being abused, neglected, or abandoned by parents. So there are several humanitarian programs that could help those individuals. And there's also people who have other kinds of cases, and maybe they are seeking relief under those types of cases. So maybe they have a family member who is a US citizen and they could petition for residency through that family member. Maybe they have a relative who has medical issues. So there is a variety of relief. It's not just asylum that some of these individuals are focused, and I think that it's really important to say that. But I do think that right now there is a narrative and there is a very large focus, even if you read the executive orders that were released yesterday, on suspending refugee admissions, for example, or stopping all asylum applications in the United States. And it leads the public to believe that everybody who's coming to the United States is seeking asylum. And I don't think that that is a correct narrative.
Yeah. Let's just take the people who came under the Biden parole programs. Do you think they have to be fearful of actions that could leave them open to apprehension by ICE?
We saw yesterday the cancellation slash revocation of several actions that Biden has taken. I think the number were 70 something. I don't want to misquote, but there were 70 something actions by Biden that were canceled by the current administration. So I do think that individuals who came through a parole program should be speaking to an attorney to determine what is a long-term solution for them, because I do think that they could be at risk, not necessarily of detention, but of losing that status.
Got it. Which would which would probably require another executive action at some point over the coming days from President Trump.
That is correct.
Um, and then for everybody else, um, that you were talking about, these other groups of people who presented themselves at the border or took a different pathway to get into the United States, in order for them to be detained, you believe he would have to expand the definition of expedited removal?
I think that that's the way he would go about.
Got it. And my last question is, right now, as it stands, and obviously, as I said yesterday, this is changing minute by minute by minute. But even if one is detained by ICE, there is due process before a judge.
So that's a really good question, and I think a complex one to answer. One of the concerns about the Laken Riley Act specifically was about whether or not a state could sue the Department of Homeland Security for choosing to release an individual who was detained under this act. Individuals who are detained, most of them, if they're not subject to mandatory detention, which there is a category of individuals who are subject to mandatory detention, they could seek bond at an immigration court, and they would have to demonstrate that, one, they're not a danger to the society, and two, that they're not a flight risk. So those are the two things that a court would be looking at. So my response is yes, a lot of them could seek bond at the immigration court unless they're subject to mandatory detention, which depends on how they are classified on the charging document that exists against them in removal proceedings. But a large majority of them could request a bond at the immigration court.
Got it.
But we also saw, if I may say, yesterday there was, a large number of Department of Justice individuals who are no longer employed by the government in the EOIR system. So it makes us begin to wonder, although again, we have to wait and see if this is signaling a big change on how cases are going to be processed at the Executive Office of Immigration Removal, which are administrative courts and not courts like Federal Court of Appeals. So there could be a shift in how cases are viewed.